We are live.
All right, welcome to the House Judiciary Committee this Thursday morning, March 26th, and we're continuing to look at the Representative McGuire's amendment to H 937, and we're going to start with General Uncle Jay Johnson. If you could please join us.
Mr. Chair, morning, Cody. Morning.
Tom, could you get your as well as always coming from out there? Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for taking up this amendment, which is something that we believe is an important amendment. I do want to say that I listened to your committee. I caught up on your conversation yesterday, and I was very pleased to hear the takeaways that you had from the joint hearing that you had. You absolutely got the point, what we were trying to do, which was appropriate placements and treatments for individuals in our communities who need it, because if the underlying behavior is driving a crime, then you have to deal with that underlying behavior before you can reduce the issues of repeat offenses in communities. So it's sort of a win-win on public health and public safety. So I was really heartened. I appreciated it when Coach Christie said he observed that you need to stay true to the template in order to achieve the same success in the counties where we're using what we're calling the accountability court, the accountability docket. But I do want to clarify what seemed to be a misunderstanding about what was happening in Rutland County. So the executive branch did commit resources for 5 days a week. We had AHS lined up to provide healthcare resources like we had in Chittenden County. We had the transport backup system in place, knowing that while there is a facility in Rutland for men, there isn't one for women, and there would be transport needs there and potentially for men as well to other facilities. So we have had that sort of phone tree set up for transports. We had DOC supports lined up because we found during the Chittenden Accountability Court, DOC presence at sentencing was very important. And I'm sure that we could do a better job for all of those things in Rutland. The transition, however, has been bumpy because there really hasn't been startup time. So the process, also, I guess I would just like to say, the prosecutor dedicated a deputy. So we were told early on from state's attorneys and sheriffs that they would not need a special prosecutor because the state's attorney's office was going to dedicate a deputy for 5 days a week. They are also dedicating the necessary admin support and victim advocacy supports that are needed for these cases. So, and all of that is sort of done after an assessment of, this is going to cost this much in overtime, or we think that and this is what happened in Chittenden. This is where we have a part-time person, we can maybe add hours. So it is a little bit of a case-by-case, how is this going to work assessment, but that's how we put all these things together going into this process. Like the Defender General testified yesterday, they can scale up or scale down as needed. And so I also want to say that the governor did allocate $500,000 in addition to reimbursement for the Chittenden County effort. The governor and the legislature approved $500,000 in the BAA for what we're calling the accountability court, reimbursement for those costs. And this committee and the Committee on Institutions is talking about how to allocate other resources, unused resources, to what everybody is referring to as accountability court. But it's important to me to recognize that there is then no accountability court without the cooperation and collaboration of the judiciary. The governor cannot mandate a court, although the legislature can create a lower court. The governor cannot assign judges or court staff or require the use of certain court space, right? Only the judiciary can do those things. So just like pretrial supervision, it's really not worth having the tool if the judiciary won't use it. I mean, that's just my simple observation. So the judiciary made the decision that the accountability court in Rutland would be 1 day a week. And I think then added a 1 day every other week. So about 18 court days total. All I know is what I'm hearing from the prosecutor's office. And I think that they're disappointed, feeling set up for failure, but willing to work with the cards they've been dealt. I think that that's changing the structure of I wouldn't call it accountability court. I would just call it, what they are calling it is a multi-docket court. They are pulling cases from the regular docket when necessary to expedite cases, which is fine. It's a way of moving cases faster. And as the Defender General testified yesterday, it sort of gets you what you would expect when you add a judge and you add some court time, arguably something they could be doing now anyway, to move cases faster. But that is not the call of the executive branch. So our folks from AHS were kind of flummoxed when faced with the structure they had been given. The judiciary had decided to work with a different healthcare provider that is in the courts on Mondays, I guess. So when AHS showed up, we did have a bit of how is this going to work? I think there was some interest in the resources AHS was willing to bring to bear. So they have had some negotiations, and I think that the best of all possible worlds is that the two organizations are working together for that 1 or 2 day a week period. So it is not the model that was proved out in Chittenden, but the executive branch is standing by to do that in this county and others when necessary. So I don't know if you had any questions about how the Chittenden court came to be, because it was a collaborative effort together with the Chief Justice. From my perspective, we're supporting this amendment because of the tremendous impacts that the huge court backlog has on communities and on executive branch agencies, frankly, right? Increased detentions in DOC that are, for individuals the cases aren't moving. You have AHS with a huge human services backlog caseload that this is providing access actually to a forensic caseload that maybe previously has not gotten the resources that the focused resources that they need. You have impacts on public safety, obviously, in our communities with repeat offenders. And then you have the communities themselves who can't understand why this keeps happening. And I think it's helpful, the chair has observed from time to time that the backlog itself is part of the repeat offender problem. When your case isn't heard for months, 60, 30, 60, 90 days, or you're waiting for change of plea hearings, your chances of showing up for court are lower, and your chances, especially if your life is pretty chaotic, if you're unhoused or you're housing insecure, having to go to court in 90 days is maybe a difficult thing to actually think about. And then you have the likelihood of increased reoffenses in the community, particularly when this is driven by something like substance use or mental illness. So anyway, I think that we all agree that this Chittenden model was a win-win, and the executive branch stands ready to provide the resources necessary.
Questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a little on the history of how this was born, I guess.
Well, so how it was born.
I know a little tiny bit, but.
Yeah, so how it was born was in Chittenden. As you know, probably in the fall, there seemed to be some sort of crisis point where the community members had had it with sort of the repeat offense problem. There was a lot of pressure on the mayor and others for, open drug use, just a lot of sort of chaotic retail thefts and trespass offenses, low level, high impact offenses by offenders with 5 or more dockets in the courts. Just, sort of being arrested if they get arrested and released back into the community for whatever their next hearing. Violations of conditions were routine. So the backlog was building in Chittenden. There were about 100 people with 5 or more offenses. And so when the mayor was struggling with this problem and the governor was basically expected to do something about the problem, the governor started having conversations in the community with community members, with, the education community, with businesses and how they were impacted by the really repeat retail thefts and the trespass, and the sort of general disorder in the community. The governor sort of proposed this notion of an accountability court, a focused effort, a surge, if you will, to focus resources on the 5 or more offenses. And so that's what we did. We appointed a special prosecutor. Judge Maley was hired by the Judiciary as a retired judge to come in and work with our prosecutor. The defense bar had a lead public defender who, and then we added the AHS resources to the mix. And eventually we brought DAC resources into the mix to sort of work at sentencing, which turned out to make a huge difference. But there was court time. There was court time every day. There was flexibility to meet with defendants, to address individual needs. And it sort of started to click once there were releases of what we realized very important is the defendants will sign basically HIPAA releases and other releases so that all the parties at the table could share information. And that was very important to the process because at that point, there was this among the group, a visible sort of share. And then the AHS resources were a case manager and a clinician in the courtroom. We do assessments basically same day. So it was a process that eventually clicked and started working when all the parties had that time to work together, to figure out what was working, to bring the defense along to a place where they realized that they could work with AHS resources. They weren't representing the prosecution. So it just began flowing. The settlements started happening. People were released into the community. If they couldn't succeed in the community, if they reoffended, they would be brought back. Sometimes bail would be imposed and they would go to DOC. And those conversations would continue regarding what was needed for the client success. And we are working on collecting that data for, at this point, I think we're thinking a 3-month update, but I think we could really put together a 2-month update to see where those 100 are, the 80 or so with cases resolved. Where are they? How are they doing? So that is something that we're also dedicated to do.
I remember that the mayor had asked the governor or asked the state for help up there at some point, and
Yeah.
the state police had done some patrolling. Is this all
Yeah, so that was all
kind of
part
grouped
of it.
together and a piece of it?
Yeah. So in the reimbursement that was made in the BAA, there was also reimbursement for the state police overtime that was incurred for that presence. And what they added to the police force it was really from the October to December timeframe. To be more visible in the community, to really be bringing some police presence to bear, which I think it was effective, especially during the holidays in downtown Burlington. So the reimbursement that was in the BAA, part of that is for police overtime, so the total costs for the court largely went to judiciary expenses, but there were overtime expenses for prosecutor admins and victim advocates. I think some other costs, but it was, I hate to say done on a shoestring, but it kind of was, it was just and again, I appreciated the chair's remarks yesterday about the need for flexibility. It was an organic process, and it was sort of one of those, well, we'll identify the problems as they arise, and then we will put the resources necessary toward those problems, and we will see how it works. And it kept rolling, and it came together in a way that I think was more successful than maybe even we were thinking. But it was something that the governor, I think, all after a while, really wanted to replicate in the other counties with the same kinds of problems in their communities. So we were approached by Rutland community members, business leaders, the mayor, the police chief. They have got the distinction of being the community with most hotel motel occupants in the state. So that creates a whole host of other problems. So they were very interested in working with AHS on how that was going to be addressed. They're working with ACCD and others on economic development tools. And I think the community is very optimistic about sort of a turnaround, a renaissance. And public safety was definitely a piece of it. And they stepped up and said, we want the accountability court. And we said, we are happy to oblige. But it was not structured, I think, in a way that the community expected.
So I'm wondering, because I remember when I first heard about this, and I was like, accountability court. I'd never heard of accountability.
It was a made-up name. And Matt will say that. Yes, yes.
So I Googled it, and there are other accountability courts. Like I noticed Georgia has one, and there's the Council of Accountability Court Judges. And so I had wondered but you already answered my question. Like my question was like, did you look at a model and say, oh, we're gonna bring this model here?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I was asking about yesterday is like with treatment courts, we know treatment courts work when you have a certain model that's sort of true to the model.
Mhm.
And treatment courts that haven't worked have been ones that have not have the resources to put the full model in place.
Right.
And I felt that this was probably pretty similar. But then I thought if there's sort of maybe Vermont will lead the way on what the model looks like for other
Maybe.
states. But
Yeah.
but having that model that still gave the flexibility, like these things you must have. The other things need to be adapted for the county. And
Yes, that's right. So there's a couple things there. One is somebody asked me that question, did you do this based on any other model? And actually we didn't, but it made me look. And I also saw the Georgia model. They do have something called the Accountability Court, and it is a suite of courts, actually. It's a drug court, a veterans court, I think one other court, maybe, it might be juvenile. So, yes. Oh, trauma court, maybe. So it was, and it is this notion of, but like our treatment court, it's voluntary. And I think that what we figured for this court, which is really just real court, is using the tools of the criminal justice system to incentivize individuals to make choices that maybe they would not otherwise make voluntarily, or are not in position to make voluntarily. So that, I think, is where we found that sort of thesis was correct. So even though there's a great synergy between the accountability docket and the treatment court, there is this element of probation to treatment court. So there is it's not, it is voluntary, but you have a choice to make to the extent that you can participate in treatment court, or you can you have a more definite sentence on the side of that. And there are prosecutors, like Zach Wade is a better person to speak to about how that worked. So we really were committed to it. So it is a different way of using regular court to achieve these better outcomes, which we hope are better outcomes, right? We still have to collect that data as well. But I'm thinking for people who are addicted to substances, If you are looking at a 50% success rate, that's a very high success rate. And we will see what we see.
And actually with people who are struggling with addiction, we can, I mean, relapse will happen, but that doesn't mean that it won't be successful. Like the times between relapses, knowing the resources and being able to go back and access them. So looking at even a longer window for folks with addiction might be interesting to see. Because sometimes it's going to take relapses for somebody to really.
Yes. Right. And I realize that. And I think that that's where the difference that many of the individuals in the program commented about, at least their short-term success, was the idea that people were there. They felt heard. They felt like they were brought back consistently by the court. They always had this team in the courtroom. So I think that some of that, and the folks from AHS can speak to that, I think did to a certain extent. It was that that the individuals appreciated the fact that people were there. So that was, I think, part of what made that difference.
Right, so I have Tom, then Coach, then Angela. Yes, yeah, first in time. First. So,
I'm a little curious about how the Rutland model's built versus the Burlington model's built. I know Chittenden County has a lot of resources embedded within it already. The city has people involved in the courthouse in Burlington that provide services for everybody in the whole county, pretrial services, and they sort of acted like kind of a pointing needle for everybody that came in, like, okay, well, we're going to need these people or this service, and helps the judge and the court direct them. Is there anything like that down there other than the judge being on the bench saying, well, I know what services they have, and the attorneys know what services they have, but then getting them on the horn or bringing them in or actually taking them physically or pointing them in the right direction, making sure that it happens.
Yes, I mean, you have to talk to somebody in the courtroom about that, but my impression is that you have a case manager, possibly somebody from AHS, and a clinician from one of the organizations in Rutland who are there in the courtroom. And that was, so yes, I understand what you're saying. There are resources in Chittenden County in the courthouse. Those resources are dedicated to the treatment court. It's my understanding there's a treatment court in Rutland as well. I'm not sure where those resources, and Terry or Tom, I'm sure, can speak to that. But I feel like that's another asset for Rutland, really. But that is from the accountability court perspective. That's how it's envisioned sort of for every other county where this might move, is case manager, clinician in the courtroom. So the judge isn't just, okay, where's the phone number for the guy who's I mean, they're right there in Rutland, yes. But only one day a week and then every other Tuesday.
Coach.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Coach.
Hello, Attorney Johnson. How are you?
Good to see you. Hi.
There you are. Now we got more, Coach.
We got most of you.
Yeah, I gotta move the
It's more than
camera.
I've seen.
I think it still goes back to that, the clear observation of setting up the model exactly the same way. And I think that Jay alluded to that, especially with the case management component. What we've seen over almost every project that's been very successful is the quality of the case management. And it doesn't matter if it's rehab, it's Medicaid, Medicare, when you've got, whatever we want to call them, interceptors, project managers, whatever, it's them doing the case management that is mission critical. So what we did see in Chittenden was that proactive piece of having that case manager in the courtroom was mission critical. I think the reason that the Chief Justice felt so compelled, to move in that direction, both in Chittenden and in Rutland, is he spoke at a gathering about the sequential intercept model, and basically that was a piece that the U.S. Chief Justices had been um, reviewing over the last year or so. And when you look at it, it is the model that we're using in Chittenden, and you can call it what you want to call it, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. And I think that, he noticed, and that's why he and Judge Zone, were able to, jump into action, fairly quickly, in Chittenden, and, are supporting the process through the rest of the counties. And again, we've got to keep true to the mission. We can't deviate, because that's when things start to, come apart a little bit. So, again, thanks for all of your work, Jay. And, I think that if we can team up like we did in Chittenden, and there's still, work to be done in Rutland, and it's not over till it's over. So let's
Thank
move
you.
forward.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, that's part of the point of the 5 or more is when you're looking at sequential intercept, these are individuals who have blown through a lot of other opportunities already. Restorative justice opportunities, probably other kinds of treatments, or perhaps incarceration and release, or probation and release, individuals who have not succeeded in the community. And this is a place where you are farther down the scale of the sequential intercept, where you're using other resources like the criminal justice system to try and address the needs of the individuals.
I think it's my
Oh,
no, I'm gonna go ahead. Thank you for being here. I have a couple of questions related to some testimony we heard yesterday on amendment.
Yeah.
And I guess first I want to understand a little better. Well, I'll ask it in the we heard from Matt Valerio, our Defender General, yesterday, and he pointed, as you probably know from listening, and on page 2 of the amendment, line 11, it says every county that asks for a community accountability court docket. And his questions, which I share, like, who's asking, how does it start? Like, how was the decision made to move to Rutland County?
Right. So I appreciate that question, and I did appreciate the observation, which is valid. It was an organic process, really, right? So that's where we started with a pilot, and then we again sort of moved to Rutland because Rutland raised their hand and said, "We're ready to go. Like, we have a prosecutor, we have a police chief who's all over this. Like, we will make transports work. Like, we're right there with you." So we moved it to Rutland, But it's a good point when you're talking about codifying something. How do you maintain flexibility and at the same time allocate resources and create a program that it has to be sort of articulated in a session law? So I can tell you there are conversations already with other counties who are interested, and that's kind of what happens. They raise their hand and they say, "We're interested now." Senator Hashim has approached several people to talk about it. I think the Judiciary may have even engaged in some conversations with with Wyndham. So I think that that's kind of how it happens. Is that sufficient? I mean, because it's organic now and that's how it's worked, I guess I don't have a view, but I could see why you would be thinking about that question.
Yeah.
And it may not be every county, right? I mean, it may be that there are some counties who decide they don't need it, they don't have the resources, or, I mean, Washington County, say, has expressed interest, but understands there are going to be numerous challenges which we can address case by case, but they're completely different from Chittenden. So they don't have a facility at all, like Wyndham. Actually, Wyndham is also going to have transport issues. It will actually call on the transport system that we have sort of set up in terms of a phone tree, basically, that was never needed in Chittenden and may not be needed in Rutland. So that will test that theory. In Washington County, they have great service providers, but they don't have transport deputies. And, and so how do you, maybe there's a retired judge who actually is, I mean, if you live in the Chittenden, Washington, Central Vermont corridor, more likely you can find a retired judge who's willing to move to the court. But that's not our call, right? It's not our decision to make. So it's kind of Washington County has a much smaller office, but a very large backlog. How do you deal with, do you use one of their prosecutors? May not be possible. Zach Wade is in Washington County. He was amazing. Do you move someone from somewhere else? I mean, how do you staff it is definitely a question for Washington, but those are the kinds of questions you have to grapple with case by case, and it may take some additional time to plan for a county like Washington. Wyndham seems to have put more thought into it already. So we'll see, so that, I mean, it's not really a great answer to your question, but it's because it started organically and it could.
It seems like the type of program that benefits from a wish to something that is like co-created rather than placed upon.
Yes.
That sets it up for success. It's just interesting to try to figure out how to put that into a law. So secondly, I'm wondering, speaking of that co-creation, you've mentioned that that the governor was all in on Rutland County and really just sounds like picking up the model, moving it from Chittenden to Rutland County.
Yes.
And then if I'm hearing you correctly, you kind of hit a barrier with the judiciary. And we have words in here like judiciary's willingness on page 4, obligation contingent on the willingness of the judiciary to staff a full-time docket. So I just want to
that was not my language, actually.
Okay, so
Sorry.
I'd love to just understand a little bit about the conversations that happened before the program moved to Rutland County between the executive branch and the judicial branch, and how those.
So what happened, it was very different, and I guess Terry can speak to that some. What happened was in the Chittenden model, this was sort of initiated as an idea from the governor's office, and we brought in all of the stakeholders, including the chief justice. In Rutland, basically the court took over at that point and said, this is how it will be structured. And so while we were willing to pick up the show and take it on the road, it was then sort of, once you had that more limited structure, it was a surprise, but also there really weren't that many conversations. I was brought in once a very large stakeholder group had been assembled so that we were told how it would work.
So would it be helpful then to have legislative, statutory language that very clearly lays out legislative intent, at least, for the replication of this program in different counties?
I mean, I think that would be helpful, the expectation of the legislature.
Yes.
I mean, the legislature, there should also be some thought about separation of powers. Maybe that's why the willingness language got added but from my perspective, the legislature can create lower courts. The legislature can do away with lower courts. The legislature has created an environmental court and allocated 2 environmental judges to that court. So this is not unprecedented. And I believe that the legislature has the constitutional authority to create a lower court. You also have the constitutional power of the purse. And to the extent you are creating new positions, as you have done over the last several years, 4 new judges, 26 new staffing positions in judiciary, more staff than they have ever had, lowest clearance rate they have ever had. It's a good question about the use of resources, to my mind, as part of the executive branch, who is very often under the microscope on how are we doing, how are we spending, how are we justifying, our programs and our, and how and our metrics, right? I would expect that from the legislature. That's your job. So that's where I think that creating a court and staffing it with a full-time judge is not too much to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had one. Very interested in this amendment. Yeah, Brattleboro definitely wants an accountability court. I've had conversations with a lot of stakeholders in the county about this. And it is interesting. We have different issues with transport and hoping that we'll be able to work through it. My only question is, with actually codifying this in statute, with so little time having passed from the accountability court in Chittenden County, are you worried at all that there are lessons that we haven't quite learned yet from the data as far as the effectiveness of how it worked in Chittenden County? Because some of the sort of my understanding is that some of this kind of comes with time as we see sort of how the impact has had on the docket, more recidivism and things like that.
Sure. Yeah, I completely appreciate the question. We talked about that a little bit.
And I apologize.
No, that's okay. Many of the offenders have substance use issues. Many also have some mental health issues. And so recidivism is common, relapse is common. But I mean, at the very least, cleared a significant number of cases from the Chittenden County backlog.
Yeah.
This is an effort to actually more effectively connect those offenders to the services that they need. And that's the question. So am I worried? Sure. I'm very interested actually in how those offenders do.
Yeah.
My hope is that we have done a better job helping them with some kind of long-term success than the state has been able to do in the past, just through judiciary or just through referrals or just through probation, right? I mean, that's my hope, is that we actually do better. But again, you're correct. It's a thesis that remains to be tested. Is that a reason to not do this? That's your call. I mean, that's not my view. And I guess the question boils down, is it worth the investment?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the judiciary the legislature had invested a significant amount over the last 3 years in pretrial supervision. We set it up, we staffed it, we were looking for more money for staffing. We believed, and the legislative language very clearly lays out that it's a release tool intended to help individuals stay connected to services and show up for court, and it wasn't used by the judiciary. So the decision was, well, it's a worthwhile program, but let's take some of that money and put it toward the accountability court. And my argument would be there is no accountability court without the commitment of the judiciary to this model.
Mm-hmm.
You can call it something else, right? I mean, you can bump warm bodies into seats and move cases faster, and that's a different kind of goal, right? That's not a bad goal, and theoretically could help the backlog. But that, I think, is something the judiciary could do on their own now and aren't doing. So so that's why, I mean, we're supporting this amendment, because I think it's valuable. But to your point, sure, is it an investment that is worth making now? Well, you kind of decided it is already, but you have to think about what that means.
Yeah, and I think my question was less about whether to just do it or not, and it's more about like, should we codify this specific like structure? And that's the like, should we keep it more flexible with because we don't know all the lessons necessarily? But I hear your
Well, I
point.
mean, you
and-
get the Rutland outcome is, it depends on how the judiciary structures it in each county.
Yeah.
And then we'll see what the outcomes are.
No, that makes sense.
So just a couple things on the pretrial supervision. I think, the testimony that we've heard was, it wasn't, I wouldn't say the judiciary didn't use it. I mean, it was more defense counsel, kept their clients away from it, unless they. Unless they.
Order it. Am I correct about that? The courts could order it?
Of course, but I think that, if the prosecutors and the defense counsel are not suggesting it. So it's more than just judiciary, but put that aside. That's neither here nor there right now. I guess, I mean, I am concerned, I too want this to work. But I too also want to understand, or do understand, that the counties are different, as you've suggested. Some of the counties are not going to do this because they don't have the resources. Washington's different than Rutland, different than Chittenden County. And just some of the language in this proposal gives me pause, where it says, just a couple places, that it's to mirror the work done in Chittenden County. And that seems to take away that flexibility that we think we should have. Because other places, it's not tying the hands of the court. I mean, it is a little bit on Section 32A, but it's not saying that this will be 5 days or 1 day or 2 days.
Well, you used to say that.
Yeah, what's that?
My proposal, and if I guess I needed to request an amendment to the amendment, it would be that it is 5 days a week with a dedicated judge. So the thing, and I take your point, I absolutely do, right? The things that we know work are part of a template, right? The flexibility and the availability of a judge 5 days a week. The flexibility and availability of a dedicated prosecutor 5 days a week. The availability and flexibility of public defenders. And then you fold in the human services piece, right? So if all of this is true, that it's all very, case dependent, and we're running it one way in one county where we knew it was effective, and the sharing information, right? That was also really important to the effort. So now you have it in one county with 1 day a week. And it's very hard to manage because there's really no startup time. And you are working your way into it so that maybe by month 2, you actually have, when you still have 8 days or 12 days left, you make some progress with the human services piece. But right now, it's harder to fold in the human services piece because you don't have enough time in the courtroom for the defendants and the caseworkers and the judge and the prosecutor. They're just not there. So I think that those pieces are all important. So you could say, well, let's do something different in every county, but that's not accountability court. So sure, but the other thing, though, that I don't think you can expect, that I think that the judiciary would like you to expect is, well, we don't control the Agency of Human Services. And so if we could only require them to be in the courtroom, well, it's not a structure that has demonstrated any value, except for the clear and clear cases, some cases faster, right? Moving cases up to a point where instead of a hearing being bumped out 90 days, it's now a week. And that's great. But that's not what the accountability court was intended to do. And you don't really need the AHS resources sitting there to see if maybe there's some time to connect with resources or if they have appropriate needs. Like one thing that happened in the court in the early days was there had been no sort of startup planning. So they figured that the only way to get the individuals who needed to be in the court there were the people already in the DOC facilities, because you didn't have to provide them with notice. So you drag in some people from the DOC facility, and there were cases like child sex offenders in the courtroom. And the human services providers were a little bit stunned because this was not who they're there to basically, there's no assessment of the appropriateness of the case in the accountability court. But there's no time for that, right? So, you work those things out, but when you only have 18 days, that you're eating up the time that you have to get to a place where maybe something will work one day a week. See what I'm saying? So, I mean, let's not call it accountability court if we're going to create a fudgy vehicle force, a thing that may or may not work, and then tie the hands of AHS and dedicated resources where they're not actually effective. That would be my concern with, not requiring the judiciary, but actually requiring the executive branch and tying up resources that could be better used other places, because this is a place where they may or may not be utilized that day.
So I'm wondering, the counties that have smaller dockets, if it's 5 days a week, but it's not a full day, like we're going to do mornings 3 days, like, so that there is that everyday availability, but it's sort of right sized for the tiny counties. So we don't.
The way we think of it kind of is if you can bump down that backlog of 5 or more, or 4 or more, or 3 or more in a month instead of 3 months, then please do it.
And I can't tell you how important the person at AHS who could break down the barriers was, because without just having been in the line of work, there were so many times that things can't happen. There are so many reasons why things can't happen. And she was able to not take no for an answer, which is remarkable. I'm thrilled to see that. I know I lobbied for the juvenile version of that, but so I don't know the hours of availability that AHS can have somebody who's got the full authority of the secretary to make things happen. To be there.
Well, I mean, you heard from Nicole during the hearing about how the secretary gave her the authority to run right over barriers, and she's that person. She is generally the case manager for the program, and she is the one who's working with the various organizations to make it work in Rutland, and she's working with staff to provide that sort of leadership. I mean, I really have to credit her and the staff at AHS with all of that.
It's amazing. And
Renee Weeks, you heard from, I mean, they're the ones who made that happen.
yeah.
So I appreciate how important Chittenden County is to the state of Vermont, and how the rest of the state apparently is non-existent in my mind. This court system has already been set up in Chittenden County. It worked very well. All I'm doing is sitting here listening and getting more and more and more frustrated about how it can't work anywhere else, how we don't have this and how we don't do that. If this was private business, it would be done. But this is political. So we just kick the can down the road. I mean, this is just normal process, correct?
I would say that it's an opportunity to do something statewide that has been done in Chittenden County. And we would agree that if Chittenden County got it, the other counties should be entitled to it. And we have provided the resources for that, at least through the end of fiscal 26.
I'm hearing transportation problems. Don't we subsidize busing and all this stuff in all these other counties and all this stuff to get people from point A to point B and all this stuff? I mean, we have in Washington County. My taxes are paying for that. I have special tax I'm paying in Northfield for that, right? $24,000 on top of my $12,000 a year property tax already. I mean, wouldn't that help move people around?
Well, so it's interesting. There was this whole van question in Chittenden County. You could move more people in a van, and DOC has a van. And so we first brought in the DOC van, and it didn't fit in the courthouse dock. So The sheriff from Lamoille County has something more like a minivan, and he made that available to the Chittenden County program. And it really was, I mean, again, it was a not catch as catch can, but because it sort of evolved as a program, that's kind of how things went. So to your point, Representative, I feel like in Washington County particularly, you've got a very small sheriff's office, you have very small police departments. The state will absolutely have to step up to do something more on transports. And that was probably true in Wyndham as well. In the other counties where facilities are located, transport is an issue, but mostly the sheriffs are able to handle that. The sheriffs have the sheriff's transport deputies, and those transport deputies do the heavy lifting. But it is in the other counties where the staffs are small, they're really only working with one car that needs to have two people in it to transport a person to and from court from a facility. That's where you need to think about the resource demand and how, and maybe a van is an appropriate response in Washington County.
So we have state police all through the state, right? That's why they call it state police. I'm not very smart here, but, right?
Right.
We paid extra. All of us taxpayers paid extra for patrolling, to make the streets safer, to residents, businesses, and all this stuff in Chittenden County, state police up there. So I believe we have state police. I think we have a barracks right close by in Berlin, right? We could actually probably utilize state police. We probably have them at our disposal, right, to help out.
I mean, I can't tell you how those resources will be allocated, but I can tell you, but that's the idea. The way that we set up the backup transport is somebody from the Vermont Division of Emergency Management essentially has set up a phone tree, and it does involve state police, it involves the sheriff's departments and local police, it involves the Department of Motor Vehicles, who has really been helpful in this process, tracking down warrants, working on transports. So we do have statewide police resources, not just troopers, but DMV and wardens. And so we do have this VEM system right now. Like I said before, it hasn't really been tested, but it would be in a county like Washington and Wyndham. And we would have to your point, we would really have to see what the pull on the resources is. But right now, the governor's commitment is that we will make it work.
The residents of Rutland, the way this is not being handled, are they more at risk because we're not handling this the way it was handled in Chittenden County?
I mean, the risk
Especially-
is the same as it is now, really. I mean, they're moving some cases faster. It's not completely clear that the theory of more effectively connecting individuals with services is being done as well, but it will probably move some cases faster. And, you know, that's a goal.
Well, just to finish up on my thought on that, I think I heard you say we have more residents in that, or people
from the
housing in the hotel motel
Yes.
program down there, right?
Yes.
And I assume probably there's a higher probability that more situations are arising out of that system.
There
Is
are.
that a fair assessment?
So what we had meetings with, like I said, we had meetings with the leaders of the Rutland community. So the mayor, the police chief, some police officers who really are assigned to those tasks. And yes, it's a big problem for Rutland. We had businesses, downtown restaurants, business leaders in Rutland, all, you know, at the table telling us what they felt was needed. So we heard them, and they want them, and so they basically said, we want that. And there is some disappointment that they did not get that.
It seems like to me like we've got every system's already in place. It's been in place. It worked very well in Chittenden County. It seems like we're making all kinds of, or letting all kinds of excuses being used, all kinds of whatever, that this can't be used anywhere else. Bennington, Brattleboro, right? Washington County. I mean,
Well, the courts
At some-
decide
this was
county by
fun.
county how they're going to run each court, depending on how they perceive the need.
welcome to the world of politics. But if this was run, I mean, I guess this is hypothetical, which probably isn't allowed. I'm going to say it anyway. But I don't believe there's a business owner in the world, private business owner, or whatever, that will allow this to be happening without any accountability. It's just excuse after excuse after excuse. Quite frankly, I'm sick of it. In case you,
I
my
understand.
attitude
I
is
do-
not noticed.
I do understand what you're saying. Yes.
Coach.
You hit the
There
wrong
we
button.
go.
There you go. There you
My
go.
bad. Yeah, it was the mic. I had it all the way over to the left.
Okay.
Anyway, to speak in support of the representative from Northfield, it's fairly simple in a way. I mean, if we were to make a checklist of everything that happened in Chittenden, and that checklist goes everywhere else from that point on. So, did we have memos of understanding around the HIPAA piece that you mentioned, Jay?
Mhm.
Was that was that in place?
In-
Not the amount as much of was it in place, and this is speaking towards, what Ken was talking about, that if every single facet is listed and not as an encumbrance, but this needs to be done, and we replicate it as we need to in each situation, but is it done and not, well, we don't have to do it here because, X. No, we have to do it because we know it works. So we don't let anything get in the way in the form of an excuse to getting it done. I think, that's that frustration that is being sensed. And I'm not sure, if that was done, if we actually looked at every single piece, the prosecutors were in place, the judge was in place, the courtroom um, uh, case management was in place, the ability to do an analysis, of the individual as far as where they were in any number of the areas that we covered, uh, housing, home arrangement, were they in custody, out of custody, pretrial, not pretrial. It's a fairly simple one pager that could help, I think, with the fine tuning of the process. Because that's what seems to be, um, that area of frustration. It's just a thought and a question at the same time.
Mhm. I mean, we don't have a one pager. I'm sort of run down the elements in my remarks. You're correct, Coach. The waiver, the release was very important. I mean, our AHS departments can't even talk to each other about the same clients without a release. So it's kind of that is part of what brought everybody to the table. Once the various service providers as well as DOC's contractor, Therapeutic Works, agreed to share information, that's really when the ball got rolling. So yes, you're right, Coach. All of those pieces have to be in place. And I think that's easy enough to put together. There were so many things that we learned from Chittenden that would go on that list, including DOC at the sentencing. But that's the question posed by the amendment, which would be the requirement that some of those resources be put in place.
And that, and that would make sense. I just, think of, like one of the things, what was it, neighbor works, out of Rutland, did this incredible, home heating program. But one of the reasons they were so successful was the case management aspect. And when we looked, at, the strength and veracity of that program, that's what we saw. And now we're hearing it again, even in the court model that we're working, and, the other conceptual piece with the intercept model, because it's a necessary component. And Representative Rachelson kind of hit it on the head with dealing with people that are transitioning, either from any kind of let's say mental health issue around addiction, especially, and that that variable is amazing. I remember working with clients over the years that had been in treatment 7, 8, 10, 12 times before they finally had that aha moment. So you never know when that connection's going to be. And that other key is being able to get those releases in place. Because if you can't talk to the counselor, and you can't talk to the rehab facility, and blah, 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 and, that it just gets in the way, of success. So that's my 2 cents, I guess.
And sort of, so all of that, just to be clear, whatever has happened, the legislature hasn't had a hand in it yet.
No.
This is our first opportunity for this amendment.
Yes.
So it's certainly not legislative politics that have entered into, I'm not going to weigh in on executive judiciary politics, but,
typically we don't have executive judiciary politics. It's just that we ran into this, sort of, I guess, a difference of opinion about how the accountability court would roll out in the various counties, right? It's a court. And to the extent the court says we don't need the executive branch except for this and this, that's a different model. And then the question for the executive branch and the legislature is it worth the investment at that point when it's structured in a way that is not, speaking of evidence-based and, programs supported by data, there's nothing supporting this Rutland model.
right. So to that point, do we have in this amendment the elements that you feel are necessary, the elements that were identified through the pilot in Chittenden County? Are we missing anything?
I would have to take a look at what it says now because it originally did.
Okay.
So yeah, it's interesting as far as timing on this as well. I mentioned a little bit yesterday that we had the hearing about the accountability report and how it went. And at that point, it wasn't really determined what we were going to see as the next step. And now we've seen what the next step is, and there's obviously some concerns of about how Rutland's rolling out. So it's a good time, and we do have this moment that we can look at it, perhaps weigh in on from legislatively. So, but I think with that, are we going to hear from Judge Donnie or Terry for phones first? Or we can can tag team. That's fine.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
I think as the Rutland County resident, I've been selected too.
Okay. Fair enough.
Great.
Terry Corson, State Court Administrator, hopefully shed some light and some helpful information in as much as I was present at the stakeholder meetings that were first convened in Rutland. And I thought, if you don't mind, like to give just a little bit of background also for clarification in terms of the judiciary's position. The judiciary is very grateful and very appreciative and very much in agreement as to the benefits of the Chittenden pilot docket and all that was accomplished there. And as Matt Valerio indicated yesterday, definitely channeling resources in this issue made a big difference. It made a very big difference. When you looked at the number of cases, I think Jay said 100 that had 5+ charges involved, and the amount of cases that were reduced as a result. And a key element was having the providers on site. I mean, everybody acknowledges that's a huge advantage, helps the people get on the best path, ensures a much higher percentage of success overall. So we acknowledge that and definitely agree with that. In terms of the next move to Rutland, I just wanted to give some background there as well. You'd be familiar. I mean, there were definitely advantages in terms of Rutland. Proximity to the correctional center. It was there, so you don't have the same transport issues that you do in other counties. They have a treatment court already in existence. They had, and Coach, you made mention of the sequential intercept model. That's something that came about from a national task force that Chief Justice Reiber is part of that led to the formation of the Vermont Judiciary Commission on Mental Health of the Courts that organized regional sequential intercept model workshops statewide. And out of that grew definitely the recognition that having providers on site at courts make a big difference. And one advantage in Rutland was they had implemented that. And that was what was mentioned into Rutland Mental Health. They now have somebody at all arraignments come and be there, so that instead of saying, here's a card, make this contact as a person there, they can say, here, I'll show you, I can help you. So that was in place. And we thought, oh, that's an advantage because that's what was implemented in Chittenden. That will tie in. Then we learned that there were different, I guess, issues involved between Rutland and mental health, between AHS, but they worked that out. They addressed that. So Rutland had a stakeholder meeting with the presiding judge and then the judge in Rutland who would be dedicated to this docket. And the way it was done in Rutland was a little different than in Chittenden, because in Chittenden, basically, we hired a retired judge, Judge Maley, who was excellent, to come for 3 months and sit. That's what worked out in Chittenden. And that was the cost that they're very grateful that the executive branch suggested. We went through the BAA to get the monies for that from the legislature. In Rutland, they decided, and then Judge Maley left, and now Judge Kadams is taking on the docket from there. So in Rutland, they decided we'll use, in lieu of bringing in, if we can find a retired judge for the 3 months, we'll use an existing judge who could then stay on after the pilot period so that you'd have that continuity and consistency. So the way they did it was Judge Susan McManus, who sits in the civil division, but has her background is criminal. She's the dedicated judge in Rutland. And then we have a retired judge who covers for her in civil, so that the civil docket doesn't suffer while she's, covering the pilot docket. So that's, for example, one difference how it was done. But this was all kind of laid out and agreed upon by all the stakeholders, the public defender, the state's attorney, the local providers, law enforcement, the police chief. It was a stakeholders meeting. Jay was at the initial one. And at that stakeholders meeting, they had then the list of the 5+. So one big difference between Rutland and Chittenden is you have a much smaller list. In Chittenden, 100 people on the 5+, Rutland, 30. So you had 30 people. In Chittenden, you had 5 days a week for that 100 persons. From the Rutland perspective, they looked at, does it make sense to have 5 days a week when you have 30? They even upped it to 4+ to bring the numbers up to at least have that. one of the reasons why they have, I think, a much smaller list in Chittenden or in Rutland than in Chittenden. It used to be, Rutland had a huge backlog in criminal. They had more cases than Chittenden did. This was a big issue. They had 2,500 pending cases in the criminal docket that has now been reduced to 1,700, due in large part to, and this was another advantage in Rutland, a very good relationship now, state's attorney, public defender, and the courts working well together to reduce that backlog steadily over the years to where they are now. Very good working relationship. And that is another factor that's different from county to county. But in Rutland, again, that was an advantage. So they determined, looking at the list, looking at the numbers, also looking at courtroom availability, fewer courtrooms in the McCaffrey Courthouse than in the Costello Courthouse, one day of which is taken up on the treatment court. They arrived at, okay, what schedule would make sense, would be feasible to accommodate the number that we have here, our court room availability, and they arrived at every Monday and every 1 week, the next week, every Monday and Tuesday, because they had to alternate when the criminal courtroom that's used for treatment court would be available. And then Judge McManus is also available during the emergency block every day for the 5+ docket. So that's the schedule that they arrived on with the stakeholders. It wasn't Judge Zone or me saying, you will do it. It was them saying, looking at, knowing their docket, knowing the cases, looking at the list one by one. Another factor, and Jay mentioned, and I remembered it coming up, she said, well, if you don't have enough to justify 5 days a week for 3 months, why not do it quicker, like in 1 month? And I remember that being discussed as well. And the response was, when you have a hearing and then there's a result from that hearing, it might be a competency evaluation. It might be meet with this provider, set up this plan. If you have 5 days a week such that your next hearing is going to be on 3 days from then, it's not enough time to have done whatever the first hearing kind of resulted in. Judge Zoning would have more specific examples, but that was the general discussion. It wouldn't allow for the adequate time frame to respond to whatever happened at the first hearing before you had your second hearing, if you had it in such rapid succession for that number of people for that many consecutive days. But that's all was part of the discussion and part of the stakeholders involved, including the providers. Probation and parole was there, Department of Corrections, the police chief was there. They all had that meeting. The first meeting is the one I know Jay was referring to. Then they had subsequent meetings. I participated in a couple of them remotely, but it'd probably be best to, hear from the stakeholders themselves. But this plan in Rutland wasn't, oh, we're going to do something different from Chittenden just for the hell of it, or excuse me, for the heck of it. But this is what would make sense in view of the numbers, in view of the cases. Another big issue in terms of the scheduling was the defense attorneys. In Rutland, you have a number of assigned contract people who are scheduled in other counties on specific days. And looking at the case, looking at the people, looking at their counsel, it wouldn't work to schedule it 5 days a week because they're not available 5 days a week. They're in other counties. So they kind of factored all that in to arrive at the schedule that this group of stakeholders arrived at, knowing their local docket, knowing the exact cases that were being discussed. So that, and I said to Representative McGuire, I'm so sorry that for us to not know that they had these questions. Why did Chittenden get 5 days? We are getting 1 to 2 days each week, that's not fair. And I said, no, it wasn't a situation where, it wasn't offered to us, because it definitely was. But this is what the stakeholders determined. So I did ask, and Judge Zoney just said he followed up with Representative McGuire about meeting with the Rutland delegation so that we could explain that. And I'm so sorry that it wasn't something that we realized, that there was a misunderstanding or misconception that, we weren't given the same resources. They were, but they looked at the difference between 30 names and 100 names and the amount of time that would make sense in terms of scheduling. So that's really kind of where it came from. And in terms of the providers, again, I thought, it's an advantage. We already have this set up with Rutland Mental Health to do but it turns out it needed to be approached differently. But AHS was there. They came, and at the first meeting, I know it was still unclear. They hadn't signed the contract yet to even know, because they were asked, well, what can you provide us? And it wasn't clear then. I feel like it has been now. They're now into their third week now. And I mean, just to give you an example, I know we look at from Chittenden, the number of cases that were reduced, and that's kind of like, wow, that's where the progress is. In Rutland so far, of those cases, now there have been 6 that have been resolved that led to 35 cases being resolved, or 6 defendants with 35 cases, and then 8 defendants that have changes of plea scheduled that will result in 61 cases being resolved. So that progress has been made already. There was kind of the impression yesterday that, oh, this is a failure. It hasn't, there's no. So the same progress that's been kind of pointed to with, all credit to Chittenden, that same progress is happening. And my understanding, based on the report from the numbers in Rutland. So I didn't want people to have the understanding that, oh, this is doomed to failure and this is, not working. In terms of long-term effects and whether or not connecting with the providers will result in these people being on the right course and not coming back. Only time will tell that. I mean, in Chittenden, time will tell that as well. I know Judge Zoney and I spoke with Judge Kadams today in terms of what's happening in Chittenden. They decided that 1 day per week was sufficient after their pilot period ended. And interestingly, Jay said that they had 29 cases left after their thing. I asked how many they have now, and they have 40. So they have 45 plus now. But for that, they figure 1 day per week that's what they're doing, which kind of corresponds to what we're doing in Rutland in terms of the number of days per week, if you look at it that way. But I think only time will tell whether we can look at the data, and Jay's pointed to how critical that is, to see how many of these people who have gone through this are going to be back in with more charges or on the 5+ docket. I mean, only time will tell, but everybody agrees that having the providers there is critical and so helpful. And we're so grateful to the executive branch for providing that resource and making those connections. It's something that we had hoped to accomplish with the Vermont Judiciary Commission on Mental Health in the Courts and through the sequential intercept models and, lining that up where possible. But having the executive branch offering it and providing it is huge. I mean, we really can't, express our appreciation enough for that. So I just wanted the other kind of difference between, this is based on what Matt Valerio has said. He indicated he entered into a contract with Therapy Works, which apparently makes a big difference because the defendants see them as on their side, and for them to say, yes, do this, it just makes it more helpful. We don't have that in Rutland. Matt is trying to find if there's somebody that can kind of also achieve that role, to be kind of a, work in conjunction with AHS, but kind of help that along. So that's kind of another difference, if you will, which everybody's pointed out, having to look at each county and seeing, what are the different factors, but we all have the same goal of trying to help people get on the right path, reduce and increase, help public safety. But taking into consideration these differences, the biggest one in my mind between Chittenden and Rutland is just the numbers, the sheer number. And the advantage of having the correctional center nearby, so we don't have the same transport kind of issues, and having a recognition through this sequential intercept model in the Rutland region was very, were you there? I almost feel. But anyway, there was law enforcement at the sequential intercept model workshops who all were very much on board. We can get providers connected at the courts, excellent. So we're hoping to work on that too. I was going to mention one of the reasons why Rutland's numbers may have been lower also to begin with was for the last year, they have, and Judge Zoney asked each court to look at your 5+ cases, segregate them out, figure out how can we best move them. And in Rutland, what they've been doing for the past year with their 5+ cases, every month they have a jury draw. And on your jury draw list, typically it's chronological. You look at the age of the case and you're on the list. If you're at the top of the list, much better chance of your case being resolved because it's almost, put up or shut up. It's going to, you either have your case or you settle it. And it results in a lot of settlements, typically on jury draw day. So they have moved the 5+ cases up so that they're much more, okay, we've got to address these. And that's resulted in a lot of them getting then resolved. And when you have a 5+ case that gets resolved, when I say 5+, it might be somebody that has 20, it might have a dozen. So it results in a lot more getting knocked off the list of pending cases. So that's what they had been doing for the past year anyway, to reduce the number of 5+ cases, with, I think, success. So just to let you know, that was kind of the background and the reasoning behind doing it differently. And in terms of saying, well, do it for 5 days a week instead of, for 1 month instead of 3 months, they did look at that and there were reasons why. I didn't, again, just didn't want you to think that this was done differently out of unwillingness to cooperate or collaborate. It came about from collaboration with the stakeholders. And at least my perspective and Judge Zone's is the local, they know their cases, they know their people, we don't. And what they decide, we felt, okay, that makes sense.
One clarity.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
You just-
it's just that with respect to the one stakeholder meeting that I was invited to attend, I did raise the issue of 1 day versus 5 days. On that call were Judge Mealy, Zach Waite, and the public defender, and the AHS representatives and the TOC representatives. We were told the schedule and we expressed a concern. And those members who participated in the Chittenden County Court did chime in to say, this is not a 1 day a week court. Am I correct about that?
I don't remember the specific,
That
say
is
this
what
is not a
happened.
1 day
So-
week court. I remember Judge Mealy saying, you need to look at the local, situation.
So, yeah, so anyway, that's my point of
And thank you, because I forgot to mention that at that initial stakeholders meeting, we had invited the Chittenden group, including Judge Mealy, Zach Wade, everybody, to please kind of give their help and guidance, which they were great, so that was part of the initial stakeholders meeting. And then they did modify the schedule to increase it to the 2 days every other week, and adding the extra half hour each day for the judge to be able to be available daily for anything affecting that court. So I really do think they did their best to try to figure out, in light of the Chittenden, and to me, to say, instead of mirroring, which can be, I guess, interpreted as saying exactly, modeling it, taking those components that everybody agrees are great, the provider on site, the consistent judge, ensuring the transports are done. Great. Everybody acknowledges that and appreciates that and feels like that's, I just regret that the Rutland delegation misunderstood the change in schedule as something that meant they were being slighted, because that was not the case.
So just a clarification, the 8 defendants with 61 dockets coming up, what's the
Yeah.
process schedule for?
Changes of plea.
Yeah, the changes of plea, but when are those scheduled?
The dates were, I guess, within the next 1 to 2 weeks, I guess, was that? I mean, it might be
So this-
the availability of the defense counsel.
And you're in the 3rd week,
It started March 9th. Yeah,
so that's 3rd week.
Yeah. yeah.
I'll have to see the calendar in front of me for that. So what, I guess one of the questions that I would have is,
That was for changes of plea. 6 cases were resolved.
yeah, I saw that you had that. So according to my calculations, then about not even halfway through, you're halfway through the individuals. You'd have
Right.
14 people. But I guess the thing is, what would be the cost? We have limited funds. And what would be the cost of running this 5 days a week? And I'd be interested in knowing that from all the different parties, of doing this 5 days a week for 30 people, or unless you expand to everybody that you can do, but then that's just regular court.
As a practical matter, I guess if you were having Judge McManus doing this 5 days a week, then we'd have the cost of Judge Teachout covering for her in civil 5 days a week, for one thing. And then it would be also figuring out, well, what do you do for a courtroom when you've got treatment court one of those days every other week, that, we only have so many courtrooms. The cost would be to the detriment also, I guess, of the other dockets that are, would not be being heard. I'm not.
Also, Tom Zone, Chief Superior Judge. One of the other aspects, of course, is if we didn't, let's say, we're not going to have any additional funding for the retired judge to come in to backfill. and we had to use existing judicial resources. We would do that if that's required, but the reality is that they come from somewhere. When the legislature, as I think the bill has some statements about resources the judiciary has been given, I'd ask you to think of it like a baseball team. 9 players play at a time. When the legislature gave us the additional resources, it's because we didn't theoretically, for what we needed to deal with the backlog, to deal with things. Let's say we were playing with 6. We didn't have a full 9 players on the team because we needed more judicial and staff and resources to be able to accomplish the goal that we needed to move the backlog and administer justice. And so we got the additional resources, and now we're up to, let's say, 9. We can field the team. We don't have 3 or 4 people sitting on the bench waiting to play. In other words, judges are active and engaged. We spent time here the past several weeks talking about H772. One of the critical aspects of that has been discussed is, can we deliver on the timelines? And one of the abilities that we've said is, yeah, we think we can do that. And why? Because the additional resources we were given have been deployed to address Chittenden County, Paymore tenant matters, Rutland, Addison, Bennington County to address additional criminal cases and do things. And I point that out because we can utilize other resources, but it's going to take away from what they're helping with now. And so if we went to 5 days a week, yeah, we can do that. If we have the courtroom and security, those issues and staffing availability, we can put a judge in there theoretically, but they're coming from somewhere. And if they're coming from somewhere, there's something they're not able to work on that they're currently working on that is addressing a need of the state. So it's a balance. And if I would, one thing to add, and Terry has given a very good recitation of how we got to where we are with the Rutland program, which really was collaboration. The governor's office, when we did the Chittenden project, led with collaboration, bringing everyone together to say, let's talk about this, let's address this, let's see what we can come up with. We did. It worked. I think it's safe to say that we thought we were doing the same thing in Rutland. When we sat down with everybody, we collaborated, we invited everybody, we considered things. There were concerns raised, that initial meeting, I remember, about how many days we're going to go when the stakeholders were talking about, well, we think 1 day a week. And I know Jay did express it. And literally during the meeting, I'm on the phone with Judge Teachout saying, can we get more time? We need you more than what they're talking about to say we're going to get more time. And the idea of just putting it 5 days a week, the other dynamic that Terry touched on in Rutland is she mentioned about conflict counsel. The reason they had to choose Tuesday was because one of the attorneys, that's the only day they're not tied up in Bennington or another county. And so it's like playing Where's Waldo to bring attorneys in. So if we were 5 days a week, one of the conflict counsel with the most cases, I believe, he's not there. I don't know what you schedule, for his cases, because he physically can't be there because he's in other courts. And so this was I think the struggle that the stakeholder group had. And the fidelity, and I know Representative McGuire talked about fidelity to what worked in Chittenden. I absolutely agree with what he said about fidelity. The fidelity needs to be the time, resources, and the availability of people to get together to do things. But does it have to look exactly the same? And also, can it look the same? And so that flexibility to be able to do it. If additional time is needed, if we're on week 3, if I know they're meeting, I think tomorrow, if they come back and say, we need more time, okay, more time. Let's address it. But to start out at 5, just because Chittenden had it for 5, when we know the impediments and the impacts, that was a decision that I think stakeholders looked at, and I know Terry and I looked at and said, okay, if they think this is going to work, that's fine. But if more is needed, we've never said, oh, absolutely not, that's not going to happen. We just haven't heard that this is inadequate to achieve what the goal is from the stakeholders.
Terry, you said, I think Chittenden County got their number down to 25 and then it went back up to 41.
Well, Jay mentioned 29 was the number when they finished, and just speaking with Judge Cadence today, they had 40.
I thought that's what you said.
40.
40, okay.
In the finalists.
So after they cut back on the accountability court, the numbers went back up. And I'm just wondering, with Rutland being at one and a half days, I guess maybe 1.5 days a week. If that's just gonna happen naturally, where all these people are gonna fold back in before before I guess the resources are used up. And
Well, I think
and
that's
not have the gain that you could potentially have.
Well, I mean, only time will tell in terms of what happens with the numbers.
Right.
I mean, I think, to be honest with you, I don't know that you can attribute an increase in the numbers to it being 1 day a week versus 5 days a week. Versus, I mean, unfortunately, people commit. It might be new people to the county. Who knows, where those numbers come from?
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to,
No, it was talked about people, well, recidivism and people coming back into the fold, because that's kind of where I got my thought of those additional cases that.
yeah.
I-
And there probably is I guess, a best practice in terms of measuring recidivism. I don't know, over a certain period of time is needed.
I think Matt Valeri mentioned the crime research group, and I think that's the
Yeah.
area that would be best suited to be looking into those areas as far as definitions and measurements.
But no dispute that having the providers there, helping them get connected with resources, we've got to assume it's going to be helpful.
So. It's a logistical problem in Rutland from what I'm hearing. And
Well, the numbers is the issue too, that you had 30 people.
no, right, but it's also logistical as far as, judges and wraparound services and all that.
Oh, yeah.
Potentially transportation and, so could if we made the policy decision to go to 5 days, could the logistics, could they or would they be worked out?
Well, I look at what happened in Rutland. I think that would, I know Jay feels strongly that it's got to be 5 days to be considered an accountability court.
No, regardless of Jay, I'm just saying in general.
I think to me, it would be a disadvantage to prescribe that for each county, not knowing all of these different factors, but to give them some latitude, like as Rutland did, but acknowledging that, again, they kind of thought, and we thought until yesterday when we heard, oh, it's a failure in Rutland, that it was working the way it was supposed to look at how to apply the model, have the providers there, have a judge who's consistent with it, and look at the transport needs, make sure they're addressed, and work with your numbers and try to achieve, one, reducing the number of people on the list, but getting them connected with providers so that they get on the right path.
No, and I understand that. I'm just saying, if we did put it into language, would the logistics be worked out?
The 5 days a week?
I mean, certainly if there's something that the court has to abide by, we're gonna do what we need to do, but I would offer this. If you put something like that in the language that's in here, so is that to say that when Grand Isle or Essex County expresses interest in a multi-docket, we do it there? What about
We
Orange
have
County?
5 people.
We don't have courtrooms. In other words, at some point, this idea that this is the way it has to be, 5 days a week, I think we can all agree that there's a point where we would say that doesn't make sense. And what's happened here in Rutland is that the stakeholders got to that point when they said, okay, here's where we're going to be and here's what we need. We don't need that 5 days. But let's be really clear here. If we did need 5 days, we would do 5 days. We would make it work. There's just been nothing to indicate that that is necessary or that it's actually feasible, having in mind the issues of, again, assigned counsel and the other needs that we have in the judiciary for judges for what they're doing.
So what do you think the benefits and advantages of 5 days over 1 is?
If you have 30 cases and you're trying to bring them, or 40 cases, let's say, and you're trying to bring them in a 5-day schedule, let's say, okay, so for 5 days, we're going to bring everybody in and give them an hour. And Mr. Goodnow, he's a prosecutor, he knows. So a bunch of them say, well, trial. I'm not gonna resolve, I need more time to think about things. We say, well, no, we're moving this right away. And they're gonna say trial, and then what have we gained?
I'm just curious, did that happen in Chittenden County?
Certainly in some cases that happened, but the Chittenden model,
No, I don't think they called in 100 people every day.
no, they didn't do it every hour. They brought in the cases based upon discussions with the stakeholders to decide what's the most effective way that we can utilize the time and resources that we are devoting to this docket on a weekly basis to maximize resolution and maximize delivery of services. And that's what Rutland's doing. It just doesn't require the same end number.
I was gonna ask the 1 day over 5, but I think I know what you would say.
And again,
One concern that I have by going the 1 day over the 5 or 1.5, whatever, is, again, I'm looking at Chittenden County and, all of a sudden we've got 11 more cases than we had. If we get toward the end of the timeline in Rutland and the resources are used up and these people have circled back in. And then, what do you gain? You're not gaining I don't think you're gonna be gaining as much as what you could have, but I guess, is there any drawback?
But I don't know that you're gonna be able to keep it 5 days a week anywhere indefinitely. I mean, we just don't have the resources for that. So,
No, I didn't know, definitely not indefinitely. It's hasn't been indefinitely in Burlington or in Chittenden County. I just feel there's benefits to getting it cleaned up as soon as possible,
yeah, and
to me, the 5 days would do that. I know there's a lot of issues with the logistics, obviously, and you've done a great job pointing that out.
I think it's finding the balance that's right for each county. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this backlog that we've been talking about for years and years and years, and I know some counties haven't been gaining on it. Rutland has been gaining on it. A slow pace. They're the fastest in the state, but it's still a slow pace. And I just see something like this can take a big bite out of it in a hurry.
Well, I mean,
I'd like to see that big bite as soon as possible.
we share your desire to see that. And that is the absolute goal, is to reduce the backlog in a timely manner, in a way that's going to work. And the key here, I think, is the governor's office set it forth day one. Let's collaborate. Let's deal with things. If the judiciary today said, Brett Burdick, you know what? We're going to do 5 days a week. Every day for the next month, you can sign on to WebEx. I'm sorry, Zoom. Switching over. You can sign on to Zoom and watch every day what's happening. And you turned on several days and there was nothing. No, that we've set this time aside, the judge is not there, but there's no cases to bring in because it's just the timing of doing things where the judge has one or two cases. And you know that as a result of that, they're not hearing other cases because they can't schedule them because of needing to keep this time and resources available, which is what was key to Chittenden, that the judge wasn't diverted to other things that day for us, for a period of time. That is something that when we look at, does that make a lot of sense to have that empty time? Does that mean that one day is the right answer?
Is that empty time possible or will happen?
If we went to 5 days a week, it will happen.
It happened in Chittenden.
It happened in Chittenden. There was a couple of weeks in Chittenden where there was vacations or other time where they weren't really doing much at all. And so that can happen. But the cost of that is that the judge isn't hearing other things. We're not bringing in the other criminal cases that the judge could possibly be scheduling and hearing because we're waiting for them to do this.
But again, maybe I'm mistaken. Did Chittenden County bring in a retired judge to
Yes.
fill this spot?
Yes,
So they weren't losing.
correct.
And then why wouldn't Rutland do that?
But we don't have a retired judge in that area for the criminal side. So
What's that?
we use the retired judge to backfill. But if we're backfilling and Judge McManus is down there and there's nothing to do because there's really no need to schedule those cases with her that day because the parties need another week or something like that, what have we really gained? I think that we need to just look at it and say, is 5 days necessary? And do the stakeholders believe it's appropriate? If the answer to that question is yes, then it should be 5 days. Then we got to find a way to make it work. If the answer to that question is no, and that's what it seemed to be from Rutland, then why would we force it upon them and say, well, you don't know what you're talking about with your docket. We're going to go 5 days. Because we're able to use resources throughout the state to benefit all the citizens, not just this docket. In Rutland County, again, we're able to use resources to do other cases in the criminal docket, having a second criminal judge. We're able to use resources in Bennington. The idea of, well, Chittenden got this, we all should get it, cannot carry the day in terms of, well, it has to look exactly the same because every county is different. And that's why, again, as the governor's office started the whole process, let's collaborate, let's see what's going to work in Chittenden. And that process, I think, would work in Rutland. Okay, we started it, that's what we thought was going on. And to the extent that there's any view right now, today, that, well, it's not working as well as it should, and we think there should be changes, why don't we get together and talk about it and see what we can change? What's not working? I haven't heard, maybe tomorrow Ian Sullivan has some ideas that he thinks from Matt Valerio's office, the Defender General and public defenders think there should be changes.
They're meeting
Then we make
tomorrow
them.
at noon. I mean, they're meeting to talk about what's happening, what's working, what's going, and, you know.
Yeah, again, this idea that it's 1 day and we're wedded to this, no. We're wedded to a program with ideas and structures that we're going to try to make successful. And if that means we have to add time and change what we started with, it's okay. That's what we're supposed to do.
I guess just one last question. From some entities in Rutland, why is it coming out of Rutland that it's not working?
I haven't spoken to anybody specifically
And
to hear that, so.
I asked Representative McGuire, I said, I'm really so sorry for this kind of confusion, I guess, or question why it's not done the same. We'd be happy to have explained it. And I know I don't know that we had necessarily this community members and the stakeholders, but the police chief was there. But I said we would be happy to, give you the background. So I'm not sure where he got his information that he felt it was a failure.
Yeah, before I go to a couple, so I'd be curious to actually find out what's not working. Is it the court? Is it they are seeing crime on the street still? Do they need more law enforcement? Could be more than that. But I guess that, I look at it as what we gave to Chittenden County, we want to give to the other counties, but it's not 5 days a week. It is reducing the docket in a significant manner, and that just leads to a question. How many dockets of these 30 people are there?
282. Actually, what they did was they even added a 4+ to bring up the number.
282 dockets.
Yeah.
Right now, in the next couple of weeks, with these changes of plea, you have 96 of those dockets. I mean, are we equivalent work as far as percentage wise to what we did in Chittenden County? And if we're doing that, and we're doing that with 1.5 days, and the other thing I think is very important, would like you to comment on, is the half hour a day on those other days to make sure things are moving. So I mean, it's not like shutting down for all 5 days of the week. There's that necessary half hour. But I still I would like you to comment it, but I still go back to what are we trying to do? And that is to significantly reduce the dockets. And is this work, at least this part? I don't know if there's other parts outside that aren't working, but tell me a little more about the half hour day. How is that actually used?
It's the emergency block.
Generally, in the criminal docket, you have a half hour day built in for emergencies, overnight lodgings and things like that. The civil judge generally doesn't have that. The civil judge would start their docket for the afternoon at 1 o'clock. And so in order to have the continuity and have the availability of Judge McManus, we have carved out her docket each day from 1 to 1:30. She's not hearing cases, so she can take emergencies. If someone who's on the multi-docket arrested and they're coming into court that day, she can hear it. It lets her do that. So that is something that I know Judge Bailey felt was good. You're seeing the same judge. You're having that continuity, and the judge can schedule things and bring them in. So having that time available. Also, if additional time is necessary, in other words, if Judge McManus says, I have an hour this day before I really need to get this case in, I need to do more time, just flexibility to add that time in. That, absolutely. No one has said, this is the only times. Absolutely, you can't do anything more. If she needs more time to bring something in, we can make the time available. In fact, there's some things going where Judge Teachout's going to come in and fill in on some days to address just that, so that we don't lose that continuity and she's able to address it.
She had, for example, jury trial scheduled. So Judge Teachout's covering that to free her up for that time. So they really, I thought, very thoughtfully approached how could we best utilize these resources and this opportunity. Again, geared to our list and our, our situation.
It's a Coach and Barbara than Tom.
Thank you. I think we're all finally getting to that point where we're clearly trying to identify the characteristics of each, individual, county as we approach them. I'll give representative from Northfield another plug. In business, sometimes flowcharts are used with check marks within the chart, which identify the activity each day. So, for example, as weird as it might seem, the number of times that a restroom is cleaned, the number of times X are done. It's all on a chart. And at the end of a day or a week, you can look at it and see, did someone do X? Did someone do Y? I think a question might be, as we develop this and look at a policy perspective in the development, can we suggest that something like that be done, which will make the work of CRG a little easier and give us a better understanding of how that activity is going. So, like, for example, did the half hour get used today? Did it get used yesterday? Did we have 2 emergency cases, 1 emergency case? It would give us, kind of a flow activity of what's going on. And it can be brought to any of the venues because it's the same, and even if it's only, 1 half hour or 2 half hours, but we'd have the half hour identified. I think that's a critical part to all of this is disaggregating the individual components of what we know works. I think I'll keep going in that direction and hoping that we can come up with a way of modeling our progress and performance. So that's just a thought as we work out this, let's say, an amendment to the amendment.
Yeah, if Eric is willing. So, are you good, Coach? I'm going to go Barbara and Tom.
Yes.
And then, we need to hear from Kim as well.
So I think our chair was onto something about the outcome and how we get there, and maybe not everything is called accountability court. Maybe it's different pilots, but I'm wondering about if it's efficient to have, given the numbers, like, would it make sense at all to look at having either Addison or Bennington, like just sort of having a regional accountability court? If it's going to be 5 days at, like, when you were talking about Grand Isle, like, is that something that would work? I don't know if the resources are the same in every.
I think you see quite a bit of pushback in some counties for a regionalization approach. The unique dynamic in each county and the needs are
Schools.
markedly different.
Yes, okay. So again, I know for a while we were doing sort of regional treatment courts, but and maybe it is not 5 or 1, maybe it is one of the numbers in between.
Tom?
I guess I'll just get your thoughts after I kind of make a statement or something. But I think the most important part about this accountability program is matching people with the right services so we don't see them again, or if we do, it's a much longer time in between their reoffending. And I don't know how we do that. I can imagine it's going to be a different amount of time in every county. Everybody has different needs. There's different populations and there's different socioeconomic problems and all that. But if we scheduled extra time into a court, it bothers me a little bit to hear that, well, you're going to log in, you're not going to see anything being done. And I know that we're buried. So there should be something being done, and I'm assuming there would be. You know, can that judge go and then just look at a different pile of cases and you know, jump them into the system and take care of them with what resources he has that day, or he or she has that day, and keep moving. Just to move the resource all around at a bare minimum, and then on the days, you know, that they do have true accountability court, have everybody there. I want to see that. I want to see the docket go down, and I want to see people get rehabilitated as best we can.
So think about Chittenden. One of the complaints that, and one of the challenges that we faced was when individuals with multi-dockets were coming in, the judges had a scheduled docket. So Judge Pack, let's say, was already on the bench. And the benefit of having the time, the resources, and the availability for people to be there was that what we were told was people were coming in, they're getting arrested. You know, one of your counterparts goes out, arrests somebody, multiple cases, they come in. What was happening? Well, the attorney would meet with them for a couple minutes. They go in, they do a quick arraignment, and out the door they went, right? And so the idea was, we can't have the judge have to get back to a murder trial. We can't have the judge have to get back to these other cases. Instead, the judge has to be essentially available to give them the time to go out and talk. That's the dilemma that I'm referring to. Does that mean that judges wouldn't be doing paperwork and things? No, they wouldn't be. But they're not going to be scheduling hearings. And that, as you know, this committee knows, scheduling of hearings is important to move cases. And so you reduce the ability to schedule cases to bring people together, because you have to leave open that possibility that you need to address something as an emergency.
All right, any other questions at this point for Judge Ian?
I have a very, very quick question. Has there been any conversation about like dropping the number of like how many dockets an individual has to be?
I mentioned in Rutland, they actually did that in order to shore up the number. So now they've made it 4+.
And I
Yeah.
like, because I don't really see any issue with that. And in fact, in some ways, having access to the resources could be available for someone who has 1 docket, who will eventually become someone with 5 dockets because, you know, they are an at-risk person.
Right.
So I think that's like the only part that I haven't really heard much about.
I think that's a great point. And actually Judge Kadam's mentioned that, you know, him doing it.
Yeah.
He brought somebody with a 3+ into the 5+ because they would really benefit
Yeah.
from having this. So I think that's all part of it.
Okay.
You know, recognition that those strategies
Yeah.
would be helpful and beneficial.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So
And
at least that's
I would
that.
point out that we could also, what you're really talking about is what should happen in every court, in every state, and every day. And so do we have the resources for AHS to be in every court, in every state, in every county, every day to do that?
Yeah.
Because the key you identify is early resources.
Yeah.
And the problem is, we know the answer to that is no.
Yeah.
It's not practical. And so putting the cases and trying to come up with a category of cases where we can at least devote it there is not an indication that we don't believe that we should be devoting it to the 2 and the 1s, 3, whatever the number may be.
Yeah.
It's just an indication that is it practical to expect that we can deliver this type of service in every court every day across the state?
Yeah.
Just one more quick question. The answer might not be quick, but so Chittenden County went from 100 down to 29, give or take, right? And then after the accountability court got done, it bumped back up to 40, or maybe some of those 11 came in
And I don't,
during the.
I don't know if the 11 are new 5+ or anybody returning from the, you know, I don't know.
Right, no, and I realize, but I'm just wondering, with Rutland running what, for 3 weeks now?
The 3rd week, yeah.
Yeah, and there was 30 and it went down to,
Well, it's 14 have been,
I'm just wondering if there was any increase that hasn't been mentioned. Like Chittenden County had gotten that increase in
Yeah.
11, and is there
there were
an
30.
increase in Rutland where maybe it's.
Well, there were 30 on the 5+, and they added the 4+ to bring up the number to, I think it was 40, including the 4+. So from the 40, you subtract the 14 that have been, you know, if you will, resolved since then is
Right.
at the present. I would assume in Chittenden and in Rutland also, you're going to have new 5+ people, you know, surfacing.
Right, no, I didn't.
Yeah, but I don't
Looking
know.
to count them in Rutland as they have been in Chittenden County.
Yeah, so I don't know for a fact if they've gotten new, you know, if new and how many new 5+ or not. But I think that's what they're all hoping, you know, they're keeping track of, to be able to try to, you know, draw conclusions in terms of effectiveness. And I guess I wanted to just provide the background as to why there was a different approach in Rutland versus Chittenden. We did have comments on the actual language, but I don't know what the time is, and we can always provide, if you'd like, written, you know.
Yeah, let's
information.
hear from Kim McManus first, and if you could stick around just in case.
Well, of course, and then we're more than happy also to work with Jay, to work with whomever regarding the language, if that would be helpful as well.
Right, okay.
So, okay, thank you so much for taking the time to listen and
Thank you.
hear our perspective. Yeah.
Flying around. Can you put on YouTube?
Yours would be as spicy as that.
Oh, right, that. Like you did in
Is it the Rutland County your fault?
Thank you for being here.
Good morning. For the record, Kim McManus, Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, not to be confused with Judge McManus. And though it does have a wonderful ring. Clearly, she's.
That's a different committee.
No. A cousin from way back. Thank you for having us in on this amendment. I would like to pull our focus away a little bit from Rutland and comparing Rutland with Chittenden. It has only been running for 2 or 3 weeks. There is a dedicated prosecutor for that program, Peter Bevere. He had some scheduled time off right as the program is starting in Rutland. So I don't have any data numbers on Rutland, just so everyone knows. But I'd like to pull back in that I do appreciate that whatever feelings are coming out of Rutland has inspired this amendment, and that at this time we do have more information on the success of Chittenden. As the chair said, we did not have that all at our fingertips at the beginning of the session, and maybe if we had, maybe this would have been presented as a standalone bill. Our department does appreciate the idea of moving this away from being executive order driven and more towards what we would see as a sustainable model through legislation that has funding connected with it so that we can continue to utilize this idea. Along those lines, what we saw as one of the biggest successors and where we think the replication will succeed in other counties is that someone really has to own this program in each area. And we don't want to have to rely on the governor's office to push this, to push us to own this. And so one of the suggestions when we read Representative McGuire's amendment is that there be an administrator of the accountability docket whose sole focus is on looking at each county, deciding what is needed, deciding the caseload there, in that who would be eligible for this, gathering those together, creating the communication that's needed, bringing everyone to the table, knowing those county specifics. And the suggestion we had was under the reporting, sorry, I'm jumping ahead, that this accountability docket staff coordinator, you can come up with a better name, has that 10,000 foot view and is looking at the different counties, seeing when the numbers are going up, pulling the resources together and saying, well, we need to go to Rutland, we need to go to Wyndham, we need to go to Bennington, who's up next? And then as the program is launching, feedback potentially, and I don't know all the feedback coming out of Rutland, so I'll just say that right off the top. If there is like, hey, 2 days a week is not working, 2.5 days is not working, that person again is pulling everyone together to see what part of it's not working. Is there a transportation issue? Is there a court time issue? Is there it's a contract public defender and they're contracted in another place on Tuesdays. So, what is the issue? And then again, that's happening right now, but there's a lot of people who have a lot of other things that they need to be doing that are being pulled into those conversations. And so our suggestion within this amendment would be, this is where we think the legislature could be incredibly helpful, would be to designate that there be this coordinator for the accountability docket, tying together then the reporting piece that we would all want. And I do appreciate that the crime research group would potentially have a role in down the line data, but I think what you all want from these reports is immediate information for me to be able to come in, and Zach Waite did that in Chittenden. He was able weekly to pull up his reports, to pull up that pie chart with the help of the governor's office, to have that coordinator be the person who is generating those reports on a regular basis. Again, seeing, okay, we're done here. We had scheduled 60 days, but you know what? Only took 45 to do what we needed to do. And now we're coordinating and moving on to the next location.
Would that take us way off the court?
I wouldn't speak for the judiciary. Again,
Potentially.
potentially, I just know there's the folks who are running that, who are doing that work. Again, there's a number of individuals who again have a lot of other things to be doing. And so if there's one person owning this, and it could be housed within the judiciary or housed within the Agency of Human Services, that would be a discussion of where that would best be. But someone who has that level, again, of a Representative Rachelson spoke about the authority to be pulling people in, to saying, you know, here's the day. We would just throw that out as a suggestion. And again, it would be something that would need further conversation. But again, we want to pull back a little bit on comparing Chittenden and Rutland. We are in agreement that what we saw work is the flooding of resources at the beginning, and then being able to scale back as things were up and running. Again, each county is going to be a little different, so we would not want to be tied to a specific day or time amount per county. But the part where there's a designated prosecutor, we have no issue with that within this language. We had Zach Waite, but it's important to remember that he was pulled from Washington County, and while he was working the accountability docket, his coworkers were covering his caseload. And we would see that again happening as this rolled out. Peter Revere is dedicated to this docket. When necessary, his coworkers will be covering his cases as needed. Slightly different numbers there. I do have some specifics within the amendment that I just want to point out. We're also going to reach out to Representative McGuire just to send a few edits. One is around the prosecutor position. This is on, oops, sorry.
Are you looking at which version?
I was just going to say, let me pull up the draft, because I realized this morning there was a new draft. And I was very happy to see that a few of our corrections were actually already corrected, which was wonderful. So whoever helped do that, thank you. On page 3, section 33, dedicated prosecutor and lead public defender. Section A, the wording is a little odd to us, that the governor absolutely can appoint a special prosecutor to serve this docket. But where it says, or the governor would consider the appointment of a designated deputy state's attorney from the respective county, we would ask that the or be, or the state's attorney designates a deputy state's attorney. We don't believe the governor needs to either consider or appoint. If the governor is appointing a special prosecutor, that's the governor's prerogative. But if we are assigning a deputy state's attorney, it's the state's attorney who would be doing that. So just a little bit of wording there.
So you'll send us this as well?
Yes, happy to. This was fixed. That was also fixed. There were a number of questions around transport issues. If you ever wanted to dive deep into transport issues, Executive Director Tim Lueders-Dumont would be happy to be here. He is out sick today. But I can tell you that this is a line item that we are keenly watching. This impacts our overtime. Again, we would put the funding as needed towards this if this amendment went forward. But just know that we will be coming back to you with data on how these transports impact our budget, particularly our overtime. Along the resources, the other piece, page 3, line 18, it says the executive director of the department shall ensure victim advocates and administrative staff are available to support victims in the efficient operation of the prosecutor. if it's specific for this program, we would appreciate language like as resources are available. We will, of course, we have to provide our victim advocates and administrative staff for all of our cases. But again, this needs to be supported with resources.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you mean, Kim, do you mean as additional resources are available?
Just as, again, as resources are available, only that this is a shall, this is a, you must do this. We physically don't have the position filled, the person there. We just wanted a little bit of room there. And again, at the moment, we're not asking for resources outside of what is floating around already, potentially finding our way to support our operations. Yes.
So it's sort of like as those resources are available.
Yes,
Make it more specific that you're not like, okay.
exactly.
Minutes?
That is all I have.
Yeah, if you
For
can
now.
send that and the language related to the coordinator, whatever we call that.
Yes, and I believe that was in the draft, some language that Tim had sent.
Yeah, Tim did.
But I can
But-
resend that and
Yeah.
circulate it to Representative McGuire as well.
All right, so we'll go back to Terry and wait to run through the language and I am going to ask if the folks in here, if in fact you, Judge Zoney and Jay Johnson and Kim can meet after this and see if there can be some agreement on some language, that would be great. I will just throw in there that I think the focus, as I was suggesting before, is not the number of days, but actually the reduction of the dockets being the focus. But anyway, but let's hear what, Yeah.
So if the priority is bumping down cases,
yes.
so not really a connection to services.
Oh, no, that's part of it. I mean, it's just not the days,
Two
it's
separate
the,
things, though. I guess I would just to emphasize again, it's two separate things. One is we're dedicated to that function. The other is court, right? Court that works now, which is theoretically already bumping down cases, right? So what you need is warm bodies, judges in seats at that point. So if that is your priority, that is a judiciary conversation. If you're looking to incorporate the executive branch in a meaningful way, it has to be worth the investment.
right.
And right now, it is not clear that in Rutland County, it is worth the investment. That's just something I have to be clear here. If this is discretionary for the judiciary and mandatory for the executive, I think that is something that we would seriously have to take back and reconsider
Sure.
with the governor.
No, absolutely understood. No, my point only is it's not 1 versus 5 days. It's, are we getting these higher needs, 4 or more, or 5 more docket people, the services and dealing with their cases expeditiously? That's what I understand. And
The thing is, what I heard was testimony saying that Rutland has already figured out how to do that. It may be, and that is not what we heard from the Rutland community, but it sounds as though the judiciary has already taken care of most of those issues. So if they're working on 4 or more, they've gone through the 5 or more, they've got Rutland Mental Health in place. That is a question for the committee as well, right? I mean, at what point, I think the community has asked for it, but if the judiciary is expressing the view that they have got this already, is it even an appropriate concept for Rutland? I mean, we believe it is because this is something that the community feels strongly about. The community does have the same issues that, the same kinds of social issues as they have in Chittenden County. And again, it goes to the 14 county system of justice. You got what you got in Chittenden, and now we're talking about Rutland, and it's different, just is. So if that's, that is problematic from what I heard from the committee yesterday, as long as it was the executive branch saying that as long as the belief was the executive branch was the problem, we're gonna hold our feet to the fire. But now that this is a judiciary issue, it's somewhat different, right? The answer can be no, we aren't going to do it or won't do it, or we have stakeholders who are telling us they don't need it, right? That's never the position I'm in as the executive branch. So I would just say that as a matter of, it was discretionary for the judiciary, which I believe needs to be. It cannot be mandatory for the executive, because at that point, there is no demonstration that what's happening in Rutland is worth anybody's extra investment.
Fair enough. So,
I don't understand that.
well, I mean, it's the language has a lot of shells.
Because the court's prioritizing moving cases quickly because they only have 18 days, right? So you don't always necessarily have appropriate cases before the judge to clear, is my understanding, right? You're pulling cases from other dockets just to do, if there's a change of plea in regular court, and that's scheduled out to May, we're moving that to the accountability court because it can happen faster. They got a warm body in a seat. And to Matt Lario's point yesterday, that works the way it's supposed to work. More judges, more time, we clear cases faster. So here, it is not clear to me, and I guess that the AHS resources are being used in a way and effectively because of the structural reform. That's just my concern. And I guess everybody's meeting tomorrow. I'm assuming AHS is at that meeting.
That's my understanding.
So, I mean, theoretically, I don't know that I will hear, but folks from AHS will hear what's going well and what's going badly. But we right now don't know in this, right? All I can say is I don't think that you can yesterday, what I heard from the committee is you can't set this up halfway. And now we're saying, well, we can set it up halfway. So I just want to be clear.
So let me, I need to move on that, but I think you're misreading the committee. I think the committee wants to have the results that the Chittenden docket achieved throughout the state. And I'm looking beyond Rutland, and that there needs to be flexibility for that. But what we're trying to do is handle these higher need individuals who are in the criminal justice system with 5 or more dockets. You can change it to 4, whatever, that we're getting them taken care of in the broader sense of services, hopefully, of getting them transported to the court, trying to expedite it so they're not in limbo for a very long time. That's what I understand the Chittenden docket does, and that's what we want to have happen. It's not we're saying we want to pick up the Chittenden docket exactly with the 5 days and whatever. It's the results. And
I just have to be clear again, court time and flexibility.
Absolutely, that is part of it. Absolutely, and I understand that's part of it.
Just as long as there's an understanding that court time and flexibility is not what we have in mind. And going forward, you would have no guarantee of in any other county.
We do need to have something set up, preferably legislatively, if it's actually possible in the short time that we have right now, to try to ensure that the Chittenden docket is able to roll out in an appropriate manner in the other counties. And I'd like to hear from the court as far as any changes to this right here, and also do suggest again if it will be a benefit to have the stakeholders at least who are in here. I don't think, from what I understood from Matt Valerio, he has to be at the table initially because he says he'll just respond to whatever is happening. But we can circle around with that as well. But over to you, Terry, if you could run this.
Thank you. I think we probably are running up against kind of a bit of a brick wall, because our question was the use of the word mirrors in the 2 places, whether that means exactly or not, or modeled after.
Right.
Again, all the benefits. So, and then it's been raised before, every county that asks kind of an explanation as to who in the county, how does that process work? And I know it's been described as organic, and maybe that's the way, but that question came to mind. When, as an alternative, the chief superior judge can assign a sitting or retired judge, and we just assume that the cost of retired judge would be paid. Would that be?
There is enough money in the BAA through the end of fiscal 26, right? That's what it was there for. Nobody was more surprised than the executive branch when no judicial resources were allocated. No limited judicial resources were allocated. The legislature, from what I understand, is taking money from another program that is not well used for whatever reason and moving it into what we call accountability court, which is not a thing, right? So that's another concern I have, is you take the resources to put it somewhere for something. And that is not at all clear. Given this conversation about the mushiness of what it can be.
So thank you. We just assumed that, but wanted to just make sure, because in our mind, that would be the best way to ensure the consistency past the pilot period, to use as a sitting judge in that unit and then have the retired judge cover their docket so that we don't lose ground.
Sure,
You know,
so I mean, again, with 4 new judges and 26 new staff, it didn't seem like such a heavy lift.
So-
but apparently it is.
So this conversation, I'm encouraging to go on outside the committee as well. And let's go through with the rest with the committee, and then I do encourage that conversation. And hopefully today, so that we can hear where people are, like, by the end of the day, because we are running out of time. But
This was briefly mentioned as well, the use of the word willingness, which wasn't your word.
keep it to me instead
You
of.
would say, oh, sorry, you would ask for ability of the judiciary to staff versus a willingness to staff. And then the reference to recidivism and the reporting, which Matt Valerio referred to in terms of maybe a very specific definition of that, so that we have that guidance.
All right, so, yeah, I understand. So if there's money, you're okay with 30, page 2, subsection A, which there is.
Yes.
There is right, okay.
In modeled after the Chittenden experience and some.
Yes, understood.
And we've already talked about the court shall run every business day for successive operating periods. That the concerns with that, and that actually would lead to when it talks about it shall happen for 60 to 90 days, because it sounds like it would be possible to have it fewer than 60 days, presumably. So it might be up to 90 days instead of 60 to 90 days.
Right, okay. So again, and I'm gonna talk to Eric McGuire as well, and also legislative counsel. And again, I want to tie this more towards achievement of what this is supposed to achieve, as opposed to like X number of days, et cetera. It's like, that's what I think it should be tied to. Okay.
And it does say to include flexible and consistent court time and access to human services. That's what I see as the goals.
Can you please? Yeah.
That's on page 2, lines 13 to 14.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question. That's section 32A. So the judiciary has received funding in the prior 3 fiscal years for the judges in the court staff?
Well, if you recall, the first one was a floating judge for the southern region, for example. And then the next year we have the judge dedicated to the juvenile docket that comes out of the CHINS monies. The judge dedicated to the treatment docket. That was just
No, yeah, but this says for the purpose of more timely disposition of cases, which me reading between the lines is backlog.
Well, but those were the judges I've just described. Those were the positions, and that was a big reason for the request for them. The southern judge float, the dedicated juvenile float, the dedicated treatment court, dedicated juvenile judge, dedicated treatment court judge, and then a northern float.
Is that all backlog though? Considered backlog?
Definitely but backlog in combination for juvenile and treatment court, consistency of service and efficiency of service.
Again, what I'm reading into is more timely disposition of cases. Again, in my mind, the backlog and backlog didn't go down that much with all that help. That's the way I read into it, but.
I would offer that if you are looking at, when you say it's a dedicated backlog, the implementation of any judicial resources in any court for any docket is something that will lead to reducing the backlog. The fact that we have a judge, like treatment court judge, that you may recall that one of the reasons that was beneficial is because it was not taking the criminal judge off their normal docket to address that. And so everything, the decision of every case in every docket in every division has to do with reducing backlog.
Yeah, again, just wondering with all that extra help by the backlog didn't go down that much.
Well, I would, I guess, just agree that it has not gone down that much. The other thing is, we don't control the number of new cases being filed, and that results in the total number of cases pending.
Keep in mind that it's not just a matter of this clearance rate number or backlog being reduced. It's also a matter of the number of filings and the timely resolution of the new filings. And so it's really difficult to understand, okay, has things been working for the backlog? You may have only had 103%, yes, but are we delivering earlier timely justice on, let's say, the landlord-tenant matters? Are we giving those hearings sooner for the landlords within 30 days now? And so it all ties in together, and there's so many nuances there that just basing it on one number is unfair to looking at the entire system.
And Ken will take us home with, I think, the last question, because I think.
True. So I don't agree with the,
Yeah.
what was just said. I think if we were actually prosecuting and holding people accountable, we wouldn't have near the backlog we have. That's number one. Number two, because obviously it's the same, a lot of them are the same old people. That is very obvious, very evident to everybody pretty much in the state that follows us. Then the other thing is I know, and I wasn't for it, and I spoke up against it. When the judicial system broke off from ADS to help make them more efficient, has that helped with lowering the backlog, or has it increased, or where are we at with that?
I'd say that initially it actually assisted because we were having so many times where there were difficulties with our ability to access our Odyssey case management system due to problems with ADS. And that was one of the downtime and the issues that we were facing there created significant impediments to being able to move cases. And that has been significantly reduced. Obviously, there's always going to be tech issues that come up with problems on every now and then, but nothing like we were facing. We actually had days where under ADS, we couldn't do work in some documents because of how busy time and it was slow.
Well, I think we all had it at that time. So initially it was working well. How is it working now?
It's working well.
The technological improvements seem to be assisting us in moving cases. Yes.
And that move cost us what? The cost of the taxpayers, what, 13 million?
Independent network. The independent network.
Yeah. I think it started at 10 and I think it's at 13 and I think it's still growing.
I would question that figure, but I can verify what it is. I mean,
Thank you.
work was all done on budget. I know that. Every year there's an increase because of whatever they.
No, I understand that. It's what I feel strongly of the waste of 13 million, of 10 million to begin with. So, but you know that. So thank you.
We do not have work stoppage in courtrooms with 50 defendants waiting to go forward as we did before.
Well, again, as it was said, and I'm not looking for whatever, but it's clearly been said, you have many more judges, you have many more support system in the staffing, and our judicial system is not working near to what I would hope it would be as a representative of the state of Vermont.
I'm sorry to hear that. We will continue doing our best and we feel it has improved.
Thank you.
And very much appreciate the additional resources towards that end.
All right, well, thank you.
Pleasure.
So.
And I hope I don't have to go to court soon. So I'm going to be paying the price.
Oops, Ken.
So I would still, I mean, I still would like to get some legislative structure around this, and it doesn't
Yes.
seem way off, but I think it needs some work, and we'll see what we have, and if we have to meet at 9 tomorrow morning, or if we're gonna have to ask for another short postponement of the miscellaneous bill. Or we may just all decide that it needs more work, and we will rely on the Senate with our help. To,
Or all the above.
yeah, right, to get this, yeah, right.
We'll do our best to do whatever we can to help, and we're happy to be at any time and come back tomorrow at 9 too, if that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, and if I'm suspecting if we are gonna try to get something this through, that it's more likely we're gonna ask for an extra day, and it's more likely that people should plan on meeting tomorrow afternoon as well.
Making us pay already, huh?
What's that?
Making us pay already, huh?
Are we have a minute, right?
Yeah.
So what can committee members expect for a discussion and like how?
Yes, so, I mean, we could just, well, let me throw this. I would like to try to work, and I'll bring in Eric McGuire as well, and Michelle, to try to make clear that it's these goals, or it's these purposes that we're trying to implement. And I've got them listed and heard about consistent judge time, transport, providers of service, matching the people to the services and the like, that, and doing this in an expeditious manner for these higher needs dockets. I want to have that like that. That's the goal, and that's what we need to achieve. And what are the benchmarks that we can have if possible? I don't know if this is all doable, but I think.
What's our opportunity? I guess to be more specific, what is our opportunity to not have input on the language? Do we have that opportunity?
Well, yeah, on this language right now,
Yeah.
as it is right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can take that informally just now, and I'm just trying to be given the short time.
Yes.
We can wait until tomorrow and then have a talk of the language, or I can actually, given what I've heard and working with McGuire and Tom, if he wants to as well, to try to move it forward, and given some of the input that we've already got.
Yeah. The one thing I'm thinking that would actually be a simple change throughout the document.
Yeah.
Is to like stop calling it the Chittenden County Accountability Court or whatever. It was a pilot program that happened in Chittenden County.
Right.
And I think I keep hearing this really unnecessary and damaging, like furthering the divide between, like, as if Chittenden County had anything to do with how this was done in Rutland County. That's sort of been presented, and it's so far from the truth.
Right.
And so I think the language actually perpetuates that misunderstanding.
Right.
And I just wondered if we could change that. And it almost feels like we have to establish something, as Jay Johnson said, like the community accountability part right now is a pretend name. Like we need to call it something, a rapid, I don't know what the name is, but
Right.
it's not a thing that's been established that we're now rolling out to hopefully every county that wants it in Vermont. So,
It seems to speak to that directly. It was a pilot, as Angela said. So why don't we use that as the identifier? The community court pilot program, and then that gives it the overview and separates it to a statewide process without identifying hot pockets or separating us from them or any of those other modifiers that we've seen. That would be a simple adaptation, I think. And I think Angela was on target with that.
All right. Any other burning ones at this point?
Maybe just a little bit of clarity about how a community requests it.
Oh, yeah, I have that down.
I just, yeah, I think we'll take it. Just some clarity about how a community requests this, just so it's like, I hear that it organically is happening, but like, if we're gonna put it in statute, it should just be a little clearer.
Process to do it.
Yeah, just so it's not, yeah.
Okay. So we haven't, so we have 3 more minutes, I think, till noon. So I do want to go back to the court. The language in that 32A as far as designating one of the judge positions that we have recently given you. It seems to me that it doesn't necessarily have to be one of these new judges. We can either ask you to designate a judge or to find a sitting or retired judge to serve in the function.
That's true.
It's not, then you wouldn't actually be having your McManus doing this because she's not one of those brand new judges, I assume. Okay. All right. I think we'll keep working on it, see what we can do in the next 24 hours or
We
so.
really appreciate your time, the attention and consideration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we're adjourned until possibly 9 tomorrow, or I will just